there's some crime happening in that neighborhood. So instead of the patrol just going around in their cars at certain times, maybe they'll decide to step out of their car and maybe together with a partner begin to just walk through the neighborhood. And hopefully their presence may deter some crime from happening. Take it a step further. Maybe in that walk, they'll be able to meet some neighbors who live in the neighborhood and maybe develop some level of rapport so that if there's some trust there, then maybe these community members will feel comfortable in reaching out if they see something or experience something that maybe if they hadn't gotten out of their cars, they neighbors wouldn't feel comfortable to do it.
Thank you.
So these are efforts that have been put forward. I believe they were put forward sincerely. Out of community policing, you will see or hear terms like bias, unconscious bias, terms like this. It's born out of the Harvard. It's a test out of Harvard. And I actually speak about it in our book. So if I just deal maybe with these 2 points to illustrate the difference, I'll start with the test. I'll start with the latter.
Story warriors, story weavers, story merchants, and all the business people out there that take great interest in the power of story in transporting people, in moving people to a different space. I want to encourage you, I want to invite you to pull your chairs closer, draw your chairs closer, nearer to this virtual fireside. In this virtual fireside today, we'll be talking about a very important idea with a very important gentleman who is putting new ideas into the world. The question is it possible to reform policing in America? Oh my goodness. As scary as that may be, and I would not even want to touch it because it's a little too hot. I have a brother, I have a friend, a professor, a brilliant man who has put some ideas, some thinking into this, some psychological capital into the world. He wrote a book titled Community Conscious Policing. Yes, there you go. And we have in the studio my brother, my friend, Professor Brandon Lee. He goes by a different name. What's your favorite name? I know you have it different. Please share with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. It's an honor and a pleasure to share space with you, as always. Yes, when we first met, I went by my government name given by my wonderful mother, Brandon Lee. That's what you can find my book under as the author. While I was going through the process of writing this book, I was fortunate to reconnect with our ancestral path. I was seeking something a little bit deeper in terms of trying to discover. I was working on community conscious policing. There were things that we had been taught that just weren't quite working. But there was also a lot that had been done. I'm from Oakland, California, by our elders and our ancestors. And I was researching, talking to folks. And during that process, I wanted to also work to reconquer my name. I wondered what would it be like had it not been for the Middle Passage of slavery?
Yes.
So in that process, I was able to find the bloodline of the Dogon of West Africa, and an opportunity opened up where I was able to go through a rather rigorous cultural rites of passage to reconnect. And what was included in that was rediscovering our language, our native language, working through traditional wisdom of how to harmonize with nature. And even some elements that worked itself into the book in terms of what does it take to naturally heal from the trauma that not only community endure, but also police officers. What are ways that we can utilize traditional ways that have been effective to heal from this type of trauma? So when I finished the process, you were bestowed with a new name. And the name that I was given is Shinmiyahu.
Shinmiyahu. Oh my goodness. Shinmiyahu, brother. That's a beautiful name. It's as
Yes.
authentic as anything one can get. I am so proud uh, to thank you for taking the time first to invest psychologically, emotionally into some of those heavy issues and reconnecting with the motherland. But not just that, also putting out intellectual capital to help us understand the complexities of policing in America. I believe on this channel, what we really subscribe to is bring unsung heroes with untold stories to share their stories about how they found their light and how they're sharing that light with the world. And there's no better person that I know on this topic than you. So
Thank you.
let me begin by asking you, do you think there's hope? Do you think America can get policing right?
First, I'll begin with your first question. Is there hope? Absolutely. There's hope. Absolutely. You know, when you stare into the eyes of your children, you have to find hope somewhere down there in the bedrock through all of the muck and all of the
Yes.
and that was something that was passed down to me. You know, when I this past weekend, I went to my wife's grandmother's grave. And there are many cultures, such as Dia de los Muertos, who take the time to honor their ancestors who have transitioned. And it was interesting that when we went, I found my grandmother's uncle, who I think would be my great uncle. And his grave had been grown over with all the grass. So we had to actually dig up the dirt and the grass, clean it off, polish it, bring some flowers. And he was a doctor. On his headstone said humanitarian. And the more that I learned about him, in addition to what I knew about my grandmother, and then what I learned in speaking with my mother, there's nothing that you can take away but hope when you really realize, you know, the path that you're on and those shoulders that you're standing on.
Yes.
So a long way to say, yes, there is hope. It's been instilled in us.
Yes, yes, there is hope. Okay. So now when it comes to policing, it's a very controversial topic. Very controversial because there are those who believe in Blue Lives Matter. There are those that believe in Black Lives Matter. There are those that have no belief, that those that have become so disinterested that they no longer want to talk about it. Why did you choose to take on this heavy topic and not only take it on, but take it on in a way that is very respectful and yes, intellectually very, very insightful?
Thank you. I would probably have to give respect to the Coalition of Police Accountability based out of Oakland, California. Unfortunately, the time period that we came up during the 80s and the 90s, you know, the Three Strikes Bill, there are a lot of books such as The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander or Caste. Now it's kind of well documented and well researched. The pressure that my generation and those that came before us were under in terms of being fed to the system in one way or another. You know, growing up, 1 out of 4 Black men being killed or murdered in a homicide, 1 out of 3 going to see the inside of a jail cell at one point or one stage in their life. I had an issue myself personally in Texas where I had to defend myself in court and become acquitted of being accused of something I didn't do. So going through these types of experiences, quite honestly, were more commonplace coming out of Oakland in the Bay Area during that time. You know, a lot of my friends have similar stories of being under some type of pressure or surveillance and having to stand their ground in some type of way that preserved life, you know, beginning with their own life.
Yes.
So the foundation was in Oakland. Definitely, I was successful in I had to sue a local law enforcement agency in Berkeley, California. They have a very strong, both Oakland and Berkeley have a very strong community oversight of police programs. So if you ever had an issue with the police, you file a complaint and it's actually community members that are working to advocate on your behalf. So going through those processes, having the lived experience of what it's like to overcome these types of challenges. When I became an educator, when I began working in colleges as a faculty member, we began seeing, and as you remember, you know, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and I want to give respect and love to those, to the survivors, the victims, and their families. Well, our students in college during the time I was in the Pacific Northwest, they didn't get the same baton passed to them that I'm describing to you. So what was embedded within us in the Bay Area during those times, it didn't quite trickle down to this new generation. So I had students who were traumatized, and they began to, some of them flunk out of school. And so I began out of a sense of duty. That probably would be the second. I felt some sense, my father, in this process, I didn't know while growing up, he passed away when I was 9 years old, but when I began writing this book, it was my aunt who said, community conscious policing, your father used to have us in his living room when he was assistant to the mayor of Oakland, helping us work out our issues with the police back in the 70s. Before I was born. And I had never known this. So, you know, there's a sense of duty in the work that we do. And I would probably say the third influence or motivation was my twin daughters. You know, I speak about them all the time. They're now 9 years old. I had the pleasure to work while my wife was home with our son, but with our daughters, she was out and I was home with them. And there was a case of, her name was Chandra Bland in Texas, who had been pulled over, taken to jail, and died while she was in custody in the jail. Very, very controversial case. But for me, it hit home because my grandfather had graduated from Prairie View A&M. I had attended Baylor University myself, right up Highway 6, and had traveled these same roads. But I had certain community affiliations that supported me in navigating through these areas, right? But Miss Bland, you know, bless her, probably did not. And so coming from being born, my mother was a doctor, having certain access to certain privileges. You know, I'm looking at my daughter's eyes every day, taking care of them. And so as an educator, the best idea that I had, or weapon, if you will, to stand up for people like Sandra Bland and my students who might not have had anyone else in their corner in this way, was to write a book. And that's kind of where it was born out of.
I am moved by that spirit. Like, you know what? Sense of duty. Not everyone has the same blessings that I had. That's what you look the world through that frame, your mom, your dad. And you understood that those that did not have anyone advocating for them, you as their professor could do something in that light. And you went on a journey. You went on a journey, thousands and thousands of miles away. I like to say sometimes, went into another galaxy.
Yes.
I mean, first, it is physically challenging, financially challenging to go to another galaxy altogether. But yes, you went to a different galaxy. And turns out it's one of the most powerful galaxies because that's where the origin of life is. Tell us where you went to in the course of researching that book, and what did you find?
It's a great way to put it, great way to frame it. You know, the book and the work of community conscious policing is a culmination of many experiences, as you described. So in college, I was a Spanish and public policy double major. As a Spanish major, it took me around the world. So I began in high school. I lived with a family in Spain, in Madrid, in Andalusia, which is southern Spain, Mexico, and probably the place that really shifted how I viewed the world was studying at the University of Havana, Cuba. And being able to speak Spanish, I was able to engage directly with the locals. And that's probably a place where I discovered that there were privileges that I enjoyed here that was directly connected to things that people who look just like me, because in Cuba, it's Spanish, Chinese, African descent. And so I'm looking at folks who look just like me. And it was there that I discovered there's a connection between what I have and what they're lacking.
I see.
And I didn't have the, I could not point the finger at the white man or someone outside of myself if I hadn't taken accountability for the space that I take up in the world first.
Yes, sir.
So I guess these were probably milestones on the journey. And then once once I got to the Pacific Northwest, I had experiences. I had served on state level boards
Mhm.
of community oversight, data research. And in all of these processes, what struck out to me was that there was not community members sitting at the design table of the policies that were going to impact them the most. A lot of times, and I want to give respect to those attorneys, the police officers, or those who were retired, who still were invested their time and energy into this space. But it just made sense that where are the people who are actually impacted by it?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
why aren't we at the table? And so
Yeah.
that experience, I took away three things. There's professional experience, academic experience, and lived experience. And those of us with the lived experience of surviving racial profiling and the systems that are a part of all of that, it was imperative that we were a part of designing the policies and the practices and the protocols that were going to impact us. So
I
it's
see.
that lens that I guess was a part of the motivation for making
Okay.
sure that this information was
Wow.
uplifted,
Wow. Wow. So you went on that journey
Yes.
to a galaxy far, far away. But before we go to the galaxy, which I would let everyone know, take us to that moment in Cuba when you realized, oh my goodness, I've got some privileges that some of my other fellow African diaspora don't have. And I'm not just going to curse the world, but I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to take some accountability. I'm going to do something about it. Take us to that world. What prompted you? What single notch, changed or shifted the gears? And you said, you know what? I'm a different man, or I'm going on a different journey now. Maybe you're going to the east, you suddenly turn, you suddenly go to the west. Maybe you're going to the north, suddenly turn, say go south. Take us to that moment in Cuba.
I should have known, Brother Gideon, you're going to break me all the way down. I should have known. I should have known.
Without the backstory, the story is not complete, brother. I mean, without that, we would not know the urgency, the fierce urgency, to use Barack Obama's words, of why you had to see things differently to the point of reconnecting with your authentic African name, Chimiahu.
Yes. Fantastic question, because there definitely is a moment. There definitely is a moment. By this time, I was in college, again, as a Spanish major. By this time, I had traveled the world quite a bit. I had been doing it for a while. And I was just in my egotistical self at that age. And I didn't even prepare to travel to Cuba. I knew I was going, but I was like, I've been around the world. I've done this. Normally, I would prepare for this type of journey. I was studying international business at the university that summer with Baylor University. And so I just went. Thinking it was going to, without much preparation, just assuming it was going to be like any other study abroad. And that was furthest from the case. The moment for me happened, I was had met a gentleman by the name of Emiliano. And he worked in the restaurant area where we were staying. And he was just super pleasant. We always engaged. The awesome thing about being able to speak Spanish and resemble, my people out there, our people out there, is that they took me beyond the school walls. Come on over, eat. They broke bread with me. They opened their home to me. And so I got to see a lot more than what a lot of the other students. Yes. And so Emiliano, he took me to his home one day. I got to go see where he lived and just hang out with him. And we enjoyed some of the same music. He was maybe a few years older than me. And he had picked up some money that was sent to him from his brother. And that's where the conversation started. I began to inquire, well, where's your brother? And he said, the United States. Oh, well, he's there, you're here. And then as I began to ask more questions, he said, you know what? Let me take you somewhere. And where he took me was to the beach. And the beaches in Cuba are amazing. It's like the sun is right here.
Yes.
And he took me to the beach. It was a beautiful day. And he began to tell me the story. He said that there were 8 of them who had planned to leave Cuba to the United States. And they were going to leave from this spot where he had brought me to. And And so I'm standing on the beach, and I don't remember the next few things that he said, but I'm looking out and I don't see land anywhere. And it was then that I'm thinking to myself, what conditions would I have to be in for me to get on a wooden raft, not a boat, a
Yeah.
wooden raft, and just go for it? And what it just, so that's what just kind of cracked my head like a coconut.
Yes.
And I just was open. So he began to share with me that it was 8 of them that had planned to come, and they had taken a lot of time in preparation. And the morning that they were supposed to leave, his brother included, they arrived, and one of the ladies had brought her son, and that wasn't a part of the plan.
Mm.
And so when her son came, there wasn't enough room on the raft. So he told me, and I already knew because I knew Emiliano's spirit. He said, I gave up my seat so her son could go with her.
Wow.
And they set sail, and they made it. And they made it. And so that's why he was in a position of still being there while his brother had went on.
Mhm.
And, out of just family love and respect, was sending money because he understood that the conditions that Emiliano was still in. When I left Emiliano that day and went back to where we were resting, it's the first time that I had ever cried for an entire people, right?
Wow.
And I want to be clear that I'm not trying to come from some like privileged savior, you know what I mean, type of place, because we resembled one another. I mean, I look like family out there. And so that's the lesson that I took away. Like, where is my responsibility in this? What role do I play in this? And it broke me all the way down. So much so that I had come with my Air Jordans. I had my chains, my earrings, my clothes. Back then I was feeling
swag.
myself.
You had all the swag.
I had it.
Yeah.
Oops. Excuse
me.
Okay.
Sorry.
It had become clear to me that moving forward, after speaking with Emiliano and others, they knew they wouldn't be able to move. They knew they wouldn't be able to leave. So they shared with me nuggets, lessons, things that they wanted, because they knew that I would be able to take them forward. And he was one of them. And so that's probably the moment that shifted. I knew I wouldn't need those material possessions any longer. I came home with an empty suitcase, but I came home on a mission.
Wow. Oh my God. That is first of all a transcendent moment. And when there's a transcendent moment, what do? We pull out a vuvuzela and we kind of give it that's a 3 blasts. Usually we only get 1 blast or 2 blasts, but for that deep connection to the fabric of human, of seeing another person's pain and understanding that their pain can be your pain. That's why I gave it 3 blasts, because that's very profound. And that's something very deep in our DNA, that we cannot see another person crying and we forget about them, and we ignore them, or we turn a blind eye. You came home a missionary. That's what I like to say. You went there an adventurer, but came home a missionary. And before long, you went to Africa, which I've been calling a galaxy far, far away. As part of the research. Why do you think that American policing is so broken to the point that there are no solutions around America? You have to go all the way to the motherland to find some other ideas or suggestions for that matter.
Yes. This whole time since I had kind of gone through these types of experience with law enforcement, I was searching like everyone else was searching. The awesome part about growing up in a place like the Bay Area, Oakland, California, Berkeley, is for those who are seeking, we call them honest seekers, or pilgrims, or however you refer. It's not symbolically. There's Africa everywhere.
Yes.
Especially in the Bay and Oakland. And when I looked around, I had all of this swimming around me, but I had to raise my own qualities to be able to really understand the people who had raised me. And the journey of the connection for us and community conscious policing was, what became clear to me was that the solutions to the problems that we faced, I did not have faith or trust any longer that the solutions were within our current paradigm. that if we were to be able to find a way or some solutions to improve police community relations, and police brutality, racial profiling, that we had to look outside of the current paradigm that we're in. And anyone who has traveled abroad, that's why I'm a language professor. I love languages, because with a new language, you can discover a whole new identity.
Yes,
You
whole
know,
new culture.
a whole new culture. Your values may remain the same, but who I am in Spain compared to who I am in Oakland or in Japan, that's a wonderful thing about learning languages. So I had already been exposed to different paradigms and approaches to going about solving problems. And our linear left brain dominant approach to solving the problems, complex issues like policing, first we have to understand the foundation of what it's born out of, right? So, there is a connection to the system of policing. And I want to give credit to the people and the officers who put on the uniforms and do a good job.
Yes.
I want to honor them.
Yes.
The system and the culture of policing, however, does have a deep connection to slavery. And so there's an element there that if we are not actively working to combat it, it will automatically perpetuate and do what it's been trained to do. And we see that in the research of who's being pulled over, who's being incarcerated. So what we wanted to find was, too often people like me or us who have gone through these challenges or these issues related to policing were compared to either the system or laws that were designed without us in mind. And so for the most part, many of us just did not fit the norm, right? We didn't fit in school, we didn't fit in these structures, and wound up in jail or prison. So it's in Africa where I discovered, I'm not the one who discovered it, let me be clear about that. But there were older, and really what we discovered was the oldest, to my knowledge, human code of conduct. How did we interact together, being so diverse, people having different religions, having diverse experiences, but somehow we're able to navigate and live together.
Yes.
So there's one element of community conscious policing. The Code of Human Conduct is based on the 77 Commandments. Those were translated into English by Neb Naba Lumusa Muadinabig. It was translated from Madu, which is known as hieroglyphs. That's how old they are. And so if you get into those
hieroglyphs,
laws,
that means like from Egypt.
Yes. Wow. That's his bloodline.
Okay.
His bloodline, known as the Dogon, would have managed the spiritual affairs of Pharaoh then. And I'm a student, so I definitely don't want to present myself as a teacher.
Okay.
But my discovery process, we found this old code of human conduct laws would be, you might have, thou shalt not kill, right? But there's other things like thou shalt not be impatient, thou shalt not judge hastily, thou shalt not cause suffering to humans. It's really centered around preservation of life. So my wife, who is and co-founder of Training for Transformation, is an initiate of Thich Nhat Hanh Zen Buddhism. So she has a completely different path. But what we came to discover later, right, is that as the cradle of humanity, Africa being the cradle of humanity, a lot of these practices came out of this reservoir, and the reservoir being the history of Africa. So in her tradition, in Buddhism, their first of five, they call them 5 mindfulness trainings. And for those who don't know, Thich Nhat Hanh is the person who introduced mindfulness to the West. A lot of times credit is given to John Kabat-Zinn or some, other people. I'll just leave it that way.
Okay.
But he was a Buddhist monk during the Vietnam War. He taught Dr. Martin Luther King about the plight of he and his people during the war, and really educated Dr. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, about Vietnam and why Dr. Martin actually took a stance on the war.
Yeah.
Yes, and he nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for a Nobel Peace Prize the year after him. They began to be very closely aligned. So it was just interesting to me that in my path, or to the galaxy, as you call it, there was this concept of preserving life.
Yes.
And in my wife and co-founders, in her initiation or cultural rites of passage, their principle was reverence for life. And the more that we began to talk to indigenous peoples about traditional wisdom that had been passed down, we noticed that there was this focus on basing of life and having reverence for life that we needed to learn more about to apply to what we were experiencing today.
Wow, that is so deep. That is so deep because, yes, like you say, with all due respect to hardworking, good cops, officers on the front line. As a former first responder, I know they put themselves out there in harm's way very often.
Right.
But having said that, those that don't honor the right code, it doesn't even need to be written. It's the right code of the mind that says preservation of life is primordial.
That's right.
It's one thing to see a kid running with a bag of burritos. It's one thing to arrest them. And it's a totally different thing to shell them with seven different shots on the back.
Right.
That doesn't make no sense.
In
It has
any
never made any sense to me. When a kid is running away, how dare you do that? Maybe you want to disarm him, one or two, but anything more than that, are you a human?
Right.
Are you a person? What kind of culture do you come out of? It doesn't, I never understood it. But what I want to acknowledge here is some of us read about that, it weakens us. We just kind of like surrender, like this is so bad. We don't know what to do. We become incapacitated in the darkness. But you, Chimaehu, you took the time to go all out there in search of the solutions. And you went looking for these kinetic principles. And you brought them back and said, you know what? I want to share a different perspective. I want my people to realize we're not just one source, we're not one trick pony. We cannot have only one solution to a problem that is very exacerbating. You decided to write this book. I want you, if you can, take us to Africa, to that galaxy far, far away.
That's right.
And what you discovered there that convince you that we can learn from a different source, because maybe we've been all victims of what Chimamanda Adichie calls the danger of one story. We've all been fed one story. That story comes from a different source. And we think this is the only source. This is the only source of light. Wait a minute. You're saying there are different sources of light. Take us to that galaxy and what light you brought from there.
Yes. You know, that was, so our business being training for transformation, I would have to say, coming in contact with what I believe to be one of the oldest cultural rites of passage. Luckily, in this case, it was Neb Nabala Musa Dinabig that got the permission from the elders there to open up initiation for those of us in the West who were simply looking to reconnect from that which we had been disconnected from because of the Middle Passage of slavery. And so I'm just grateful that there was an opportunity for me to, rediscover myself, or as we say, reconquer self. Yes. And in this journey, it's more of a journey inward. And it's transformative. I'm not sure it really embodies the meaning of what I'm trying to convey. It's the closest. And so what I mean by that is, if in our community, if you point your finger at someone, which you should never do, but if you point your finger at someone, there's three pointed back at you.
Absolutely true. Yes.
So there were very few things that I could bring to my teacher or to my generation where you weren't going to leave with some level of responsibility yourself. So that's what I would say, is that it was a time in which I was able to dedicate all of my time to areas where I needed to improve my own qualities to meet the challenges that were arising. And I needed to discover how to take ownership of my role in them. And that was we talk about bias, we talk about racism, but what we don't talk about too often or connect the dots is the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And if anybody, any academics out there, Okun 2019 would be a great source to check out. The characteristics and symptoms of white supremacy culture, we have to be honest, are embedded in our education, are embedded in the institutions that we still work in today. So without acknowledging that fact or connecting it, then I'll center it on myself. I have to take ownership when I come into a space, when I enter a room, when I go to a meeting, that there is characteristics I have embodied. So I am the one bringing them into a space wherever I go. And so I have to become more conscious. And that's where the element of consciousness came in.
Wow.
Without this consciousness, there is no awareness. And prior to rediscovering, I had done the Divine Nine, Historically Black Greek Letter Organization. I had done all types of journeys here domestically to rediscover self. But it only took me so far. It was a stepping stone. But once I got to the other next galaxy, and you're talking to people that have shared knowledge for thousands of years, people who, because they have survived, you have the opportunity now to sit at the feet of those who came before you.
Yes.
When you're in that space, you're just like a grain of sand. Like you're so small. And I'm not going to say insignificant, but just
small, right? Yeah.
Yes. And
relatively,
relatively, absolutely. And so I think it was that's what I took away from my journey was ownership and constant refinement on how I show up in space, and the humility, the modesty, the discipline, the education that it takes to truly work to be in harmony with your neighbors. It's a constant effort, a constant journey.
Yes,
but it is the most rewarding.
Yes.
And I think I'll sum it up here. With community conscious policing, what makes us unique is that, number one, we're community. I'm not a police officer. I am not an attorney. My background is policy. But we, community members, designed the training curriculum with the input of the law enforcement organizations and the input of impacted community members. But when law enforcement comes into the space, they have agreed to not come in their uniform. We want community to be able to embrace them as people or as humans first. Not perfect people, but just people.
Humans,
So they would agree to come to the training without their uniforms, either guns put away or concealed. So we're not staring at weapons. And we actually deliver the training. So it's community led, where law enforcement sits beside the community they serve as participants together. So there's this shared humanity that we all are able to walk away from. And ultimately, we believe that the answers to our problems are harnessed in together.
Yes.
We just need the right tools to be able to engage and unlock that that traditional wisdom. So that's the connection, I would say, is this journey of refinement, journey of refinement, and also owning our privilege, and owning our role in the power dynamics. That's what enables us to have these tough conversations.
Wow, that's very insightful. And as you were speaking, I was inclined to think about an old philosophy from South Africa. When you talk about the cops, uniform officers sitting side by side with those that they serve who are not uniform, it reminded me of an old South African philosophy known as Umuntu Ngobuntu Ngabantu. A person is a person because of other persons. A cop is only a cop because there are people. You cannot be a cop for animals. And in the process of sitting down to reconnect and learn with one another, that's what reinforces their role. And they get to see that there's a canyon between who they are and the other people. But in the absence of the gun, we're just humans. All we got is hands, heads, hearts. And if you look at it from that lens, you begin to see that there will be a lot of healing. And I know you've done some programs. You invited me to contribute, and I took them on a journey way back to 1804 and narrated stories that illustrated that the imbalances we see today are not because of our generation. The imbalances have all been handed down from generation to generation. So when you see a certain level of anger, when you see a certain level of pain, and you cannot show any compassion, you exacerbate the situation.
Right.
But having said that, what's the difference between community policing and community conscious policing? Maybe somebody might be confused there. They're not the same thing.
Yes, no, that comes up often. Community policing is it's been around for decades. I'll give you a short synopsis of my understanding of it, because it's a term and theme that I think a lot of different people probably can interpret in a lot of different ways. For me, it was, if you think about maybe if there's a neighborhood and there's some crime happening in that neighborhood. So instead of the patrol just going around in their cars at certain times, maybe they'll decide to step out of their car and maybe together with a partner begin to just walk through the neighborhood. And hopefully their presence may deter some crime from happening. Take it a step further, maybe in that walk, they'll be able to meet some neighbors who live in the neighborhood and maybe develop some level of rapport, so that if there's some trust there, then maybe these community members will feel comfortable in reaching out if they see something or experience something that maybe if they hadn't gotten out of their cars, neighbors wouldn't feel comfortable to do it.
Thank you.
So these are efforts that have been put forward. I believe they were put forward sincerely. Out of community policing, you will see or hear terms like bias, unconscious bias, terms like this. It's born out of the Harvard. It's a test out of Harvard. And I actually speak about it in our book. So if I just deal maybe with these 2 points to illustrate the difference, I'll start with the test. I'll start with the latter. What I discovered as a researcher was that when you look at the implicit association test, I believe, what we began to discover was that there was an assumption, and I'm using my own paraphrase, but an assumption that if someone exhibited bias on this test that they would take that was based out of Harvard, that somehow we could use the results of this test to then impact or change behavior and become less biased. A couple of issues showed up where someone may take the test today and then take it in a few hours, but their bias may vary within a short amount of time. Does it impact the test if I'm sleepy or haven't had a nap? Are there other factors that impact the results of the bias test? And even past that point, the connection between demonstrating bias on this test and changing behavior was relatively weak. So there was an assumption that if we can identify bias, then we can change it. And it was like, well, it's not that simple. And if so, I began to look for the founders of this not the founders of the test, but those who worked on the origins of this process. And even they were very clear from really the beginning that they didn't claim that if you take this test, we identify your bias, that now we can change it. That was never really the intention. And again, this is based on my interpretation. Yeah, absolutely. The difference with community conscious policing is that we just believe that, I'm not going to say we, I believe bias and all these new terms were just ways to have conversations about racism, sexism, xenophobia, and all of the different issues that have plagued our society since this country began. That's really what it boils down to. It's symptoms of racism, and we should just name it and call it what it is. So the consciousness piece, we took the system of policing and compared it to our original code of human conduct. And that's where we began to see areas of growth.
I see.
It was based on the traditional wisdom that had been passed down for generations. And so in that lens, our country is rather young. Our country is rather young in that lens. So that's where we were able to bring indigenous wisdom. So you hear people speaking about mindfulness. You'll hear police officers actually teaching mindfulness. Some may talk about yoga, but their source probably comes from some certification from a college. That's cool. But our source, Ted Nahan, these indigenous teachers, their sources have run back thousands of years. So it's more complete, it's more comprehensive. So that would be one direct difference, is that ours is not solely based on academic research, right? There's a cultural rites of passage that our co-founder and myself had endured, we had to submit to, we had to go through to learn from them. So that would be one. The other would be the community policing model that, oops, you have to forgive me, we're doing real world.
It's okay.
Real world interview, guerrilla style. I just came from the Civilian Oversight of Police Conference here in Los Angeles. That's why I am today.
Okay.
And it was great, by the way.
Fantastic.
The difference between having officers get out of the car and talk to neighbors, and I don't want to say that that's not a good idea, but there's 3 levels. And my source would be Johan Galton. Our co-founder was her major. We met at the School for International Training. I earned a master's in teaching. She earned a master's in conflict transformation. And so our co-founder, Hoon Tang, she is a Cambodian genocide survivor. And what that means, she went back to Cambodia to reclaim her language, her culture, which of course she grew up with. She still has family there. And what happened, she was through her thesis, and I edited because my background is English, so I got to read it. Her thesis was the survivors of genocide, people who have been wiped out by the millions, their descendants are still in this place. The descendants of those who committed these atrocities
are still there,
are still in this place. How do they find a way to not only coexist, but to evolve together?
Yes.
So we introduce international resources to this locally focused work that we do. And this is an example. So Johan Galton, bless him, I believe he's passed away now. And if not, my bad. But Johan Galton, he had like a pyramid model. And it talked about violence in 3 ways. It talked about violence interpersonally between 2 people. It talked about violence systemically, meaning the institution. And then it talks about the culture of violence that allows the violence in the systems and interpersonal to be normalized. But there's not a culture of violence. So we may talk about racism or sexism, but we don't too often talk about the culture of patriarchy or the toxic masculinity that those isms are born out of. That's where men can take some ownership in that. So that would be the difference, is that the officers, that example would be on like an interpersonal level. Those officers might be great, and I've seen some like them. They might be making a difference on that block. It's possible. But when you're talking about this and the culture of policing, community policing is not penetrating those levels.
That is very incisive, and I never thought about it that deep. But at the cultural level, how have Americans responded to these new principles, these schematic principles, because they're not from here? And there's a tendency for humans to see anything that doesn't look like that. Oh my God, that's not good. Oh my God, looks so different. Oh my God. And then let alone it comes from a galaxy that's thousands of miles away. How has been the response to this?
I have to say that overall, very warm from both community and police. So in my book, we try to be as transparent as possible. We don't present this as anything of perfection. It's a work in progress. But hopefully it's a milestone that we all can benefit from. That's why we've wanted to capture it in a book.
Why not?
So what I mean by that is there has been law enforcement agencies, there has been community-based organizations, there have been local governments who have all reached out and that we've worked with to establish community oversight boards of law enforcement. And that means us working together in different cities, for city police, for county police. We have been instrumental in designing new curriculum training programs, and even some community-led coaching for law enforcement, just creating opportunities to kind of create these bridges in an authentic way. Of course, with any new endeavor, particularly if you're making progress, to be honest, what comes with that, is hate sometimes in
Yeah.
certain ways.
Yeah.
But to be honest, because I think at the core of it, I try to spend time focusing on those who have received us well,
Mhm.
even if they had questions, we were embraced.
Mhm.
Um, and for the rest, I believe it really boiled down to the teachers that we are uplifting are
Mhm.
very dark skinned people.
Mhm. Mhm. Really?
So our,
And
from the galaxy, from
that's a fact, because look at there's an example from Atlanta. So usually there's an issue with maybe a white cop suffers from some kind of intrinsic bias or implicit bias and picks up an arm very easily on somebody that looks different.
right,
But we've also had cases in Atlanta, which of course talk about the larger issue, which is institutional or systemic racism.
right,
Black police, black cops also taking up arms or
right,
making it easy to kill a young black man for whatever reason.
right.
So I'm glad you mentioned that that is well received, not just on one side, but even on the black side too. Yes.
That's right. That's
You
right.
want to talk to that briefly, because I know you've done some work with probation officers, and then we know
Mhm.
that they are very much in touch with the ground.
Right,
And I was
right.
privy to one of those special sessions in
Mm,
Portland. You want to talk about that a little bit?
yes, that's where it's important. It's the culture that we're
Mhm.
talking about that can be invisible because we're all swimming in it.
Yes,
That's
it's we're
why
all embedded in it.
we're
We're
all right.
all of us, all of us.
That's where it's a slippery slope. Of course,
Mhm.
someone has to take responsibility. There has to be accountability. That's the first step in healing.
Mhm.
So I want to put that aside for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
But past that point, we also have to take ownership of what biases, what symptoms, what are we bringing into the conversation. And so you'll find in some places, even Black officers who
Mhm.
may be a part of that culture
Mhm.
will still exhibit the same type of activities
Mhm.
towards communities, right?
Yes,
That we
yes,
find in some
yes,
of the white officers that
yes.
turn out to be
Thank
kind of
you.
the bad apples.
Thank you.
Exactly.
That's what is very powerful. Then it's a systemic issue. It's not so much about sometimes the color of the skin.
That's right.
And we're all products, absolute products of the system in which we live. And that system was cultivated during a certain time. You made it very clear in the book. And if we're not conscious of that,
Right.
we cannot then take the steps to rewind or to reclaim our true selves and our true values, as in all humans value.
Exactly. And what you just described actually was my experience going through the Kemetic Cultural Rites of Passage. It is
Okay.
a passage for everyone. I
Mhm.
asked my teacher, so we're an African-based system. There are white people, there are different people, these people,
Mhm.
and because of their lineage is so
Mhm.
old and so
Mhm.
vast,
Mhm.
what he had to help me understand is that the Kemetic principle, the Kemetic people, were all indigenous
Mhm.
cultures
Mhm.
who were working towards the same common goal.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that diversity of
Mhm.
experience,
Mhm.
we actually do research as a language professor. I believe it came out of Paris, but in teaching English, that's what I'm an English professor. In
Mhm.
teaching English, if we're not careful, we must also work to preserve the indigenous native languages, because
Yes.
when they die, the plants associated with those languages or that culture, the
Yes.
animals
Yes.
associated with that culture, they
Yeah.
also die. With more
Yeah.
diversity is
Yeah.
actually in people, it creates a more biodiverse environment that's
Yes.
healthier for everyone. So what you describe is another thing that I took away from the Kemetic experience, and those of us who are working to aspire to live by those
Mhm.
77 commandments. And it's not easy.
Wow. So the 77 Kemetic commandments, you put them side by side with the police code. How many numbers are there on the police code from the Western perspective, if you don't mind? Is it 10, 20, 30?
I don't. For those who know, I think the source that we used was I want to say it's Robert's Code.
Mhm.
It'll come to me.
Okay.
I don't remember the numbers, but what I can share is that when we put up the indigenous
Mhm.
human code of conduct
Yeah.
next to the code of how we are to be policed and the
Yeah.
origins from where that came from, all of this analysis is actually in the book. We provide
Right.
pretty comprehensive
Yeah.
historical approach.
Yeah.
Um, the I would just say that it was daunting to realize and understand why we have some of the issues that we have and
Oh,
how old they are. So I think one thing maybe some of the I won't say we didn't have any detractors, but
okay.
some of the negative, and it's not it's just hate. You know, when
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
coming up, you get hate. It's just a part of it.
Yeah.
We call it paparazzi. I'm gonna call it what it is.
Yeah.
Um, some of the hate was if we as a community or society embrace
Mhm.
traditional wisdom like that of the Native Americans who were basically slaughtered, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this story can be told from all around the world.
Mhm.
If we begin to embrace and center the traditional wisdom
Mhm.
of our ancestors and elders in that way, then what
Mhm.
happens to all of the investment in the academic research
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
quite honestly relatively young?
Yeah.
So what I noticed sitting on the state boards and setting up these community oversight boards of law enforcement, et cetera, was
Mhm.
there was a lot of money going back and forth.
Mm.
So this body would get funded. So something would happen to a community member, then this government agency would get funding to go do something, and then they
Yeah.
would fund the investigators, and then they would fund the researchers, and then there's just money
Mhm.
going around.
Yeah.
And again, this is just my observation.
Yeah.
So I could be wrong, but my observation was, like I mentioned previously, where's the community?
Mhm.
Where are those on the ground who's doing this work? You know, that
Yep.
who we
Yep.
actually call before the police,
Yeah.
where are they?
Yeah.
And if our approach was truly embraced in the mainstream, I
Mhm.
believe that there were folks who were concerned that it could tug at how money typically flows through a city or through a
Mhm.
county and
Mhm.
who would be funded compared to who would then no
Yeah.
longer be qualified to be funded. And there would
Oh.
be a power, there would be a power,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
reversal or a
Yeah.
switching. So I think that's it wasn't like hate people don't like me type of hate, but I think those of us who had the clarity to see like,
Mhm.
oh, if this idea or approach really is centered, then it could really take away from the investment in the implicit bias, the unconscious bias,
Mm.
the
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
things that quite frankly just are not working.
Yes.
But people would rather it not work and get paid. So I
Exactly.
better not say too much because I don't want nobody looking for me.
Okay. Okay. No, I promise I will not. I will not press hard on that. But going forward, what is the next phase? This book has been out since 2021. I'm
Yes.
very fortunate. I was privy to the final stages of the book. But since then till now, through the pandemic, what are the next big steps going forward?
Mhm.
We have like four more minutes to wrap up.
Okay. So even though I grew up in Oakland, our base was we started when we were doing work in Oregon, as I mentioned earlier, in the Pacific Northwest.
Mhm.
We were successful; things went well. I want to give a lot of love and respect to those we were able to meet and engage with there. Now we are in California, where I grew up, and where our co-founder grew up, and we are seeking to now establish T4T on the West Coast,
Mhm.
and we are taking the steps. The We are taking the necessary steps to engage with the stakeholders here, making
Mhm.
sure we give honor and credit to those who have already been doing this work, and
Mhm.
then see how we can play a role and be supportive here. So that's the
Okay.
next evolution: is community conscious policing here in California and Southern California in particular.
Okay. And I know you're very busy with your work as a professor. For those who are interested in trying new solutions that can touch the head,
Mhm.
the heart, and the hands,
That's right.
based on old indigenous knowledge that has been around for thousands of years. You cannot ignore that because without that, we'll not be here.
That's right.
For those who want to find out a little bit more about what you do, T4T, where can they go and how can they reach out to you to probably go conduct a workshop or set up some coaching for the officers or for the people on the ground? How can they find you?
Perfect. Check us out at T4T. That's T, the number 4, T, works.com. T4Tworks.com. We will have a new and refreshed website, which is T4TsavesLives.com. T4TsavesLives.com. That'll probably go live in the next week or two. But T4Tworks.com is active now. Feel free to browse, and you can hit me up directly, T4Tworks@gmail.com. If there's any way that we can be a support with coaching, facilitation, training, civilian oversight of police, please reach out and let us know.
That is amazing. That's the kind of work that very few people are doing, especially with a fresh lens. I don't mean there are a lot of people that are doing it, but what lens are they using? For free.
Right.
Free. Some of them, their lenses are a little bit translucent. You can't see through. So why would you keep using the same lens if the lens is not working? Try a fresh lens, because that's gonna help you to magnify the issues and see the issues a lot better. So talk to Professor Chemianku, because he has done a lot of work, heart-centered work that can change your community. Before I let you go, brother, I need you to, now in the true fashion of an unsung hero, what's your claim to fame?
My claim to fame is being the best husband, father, and community member, son, cousin, teacher that I can be. If I make my teachers proud, I think I've done all that I can do.
Wow, that is the most powerful I've heard for a long time. That is so genuine, that is so sincere, and it's so much you whom I know, what who you are and what you do in the community. Next one is some of the people that viewers of this channel, this special channel, Story Warrior channel, they are business people. Do you have any tips for people to find opportunities in the community to work with community-minded people?
Yes. So actually, we promote an extension of our brand is community conscious leadership. Community conscious leadership. And what's necessary many times in our scientific-based approaches is very left-brain dominant approach to solving problems, which kind of blocks us out from all the creativity and innovation that we're trying to introduce. So we work to balance that out with right brain based strategies. So, Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind, Dr. Gilbo Taylor, My Stroke of Insight. These are like resources that we would encourage leaders that we're coaching as just like a baseline to understand the parts at a very basic level, the parts of our brain, and most especially how our brain is connected to motivation. And if we are not coming from the right place mentally, then we actually can contribute to the negative outcomes that are showing up. And I think that's where any leader, teacher, police officer has to take some ownership and discover truly what approach will support in yielding the result that we're looking for. And a lot of times we have to do more brain work than what's being required of us at this time.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, if someone wants to go on the transformation all the way to the galaxy, far, far away.
Right. That's right.
How do they get there? Or who do they contact? Is that info? Is that guarded information, or is it something that other viewers can take advantage of? Because it can be transformational, as you said.
Absolutely. So a few of the rites of passage that we have gone through, me personally, I want to give a shout out to Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. That's my Black Greek letter organization. The Order of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Prince Hall was recognized as a Black founder of the United States of America. We know our slave narrative and give honor and praise to those ancestors who sacrificed so much for us. But there were also Black people who were free, paying taxes, owning businesses, voting, fighting in the revolution, a legacy of freedom that is parallel. And then finally, I was able to, there's actually an online initiation opportunity. I'm no longer a member or connected with them, but we refer to it as KEPTA, or the Earth Center in English. And they have online initiations, and they also have temples around the world. And it's because of Neb Nabalamusa Mordinabig that there is an opportunity to embark upon the cultural rites of passage that I described, which entails of learning your native language, learning how to harmonize with nature, and also how to heal oneself using these traditional principles.
Wow, that's very deep. That's very powerful. And then now the last one. If you walk into a room and there are 4 chairs, and there's nothing metaphysical about it, it's just 4 chairs. One of the chairs is standing in a triangle. The second chair is standing on a squiggly. The third chair is standing on a circle. And the fourth one is in a square, or standing on top of a square. Which of these would you most likely go to? Is it the triangle? Is it the squiggly? Is it a harmon? Is it a circle, or is it the square?
If I am with someone, it would be the circle, so that we are all equidistant from the center. We all, so no matter what we walk in with, when we sit down, we are all equidistant from the center. So we all on the same level. If I was by myself and had to choose a chair, it would be the square. Working to be alignment. When I was a young man, I thought that the square would be like connecting me and like people on this plane. But actually, I think the square is like connecting us with the higher plane to self. So I would seek to sit on the chair. The square, I think, would be most stable.
Wow, that is powerful. Okay, so first, the circle, based on psychogeometrics, is for harmony, and you nailed it. Because if you're in order with others, you're sitting with others, you want to, show them that you respect them. So the circle is for those that are doing the kind of work that you're doing, like an author, those in community-related work. These are the best people to sit in the circle. So it's very authentic there. And then with respect to the square, that's for people that like perfection. There's like CPAs, those people that are like legal minded, they want to make sure that it's done according to the law. So I really appreciate this opportunity to hang out virtually around this virtual fireside, unpacking community conscious policing, which is a brilliant new idea that is very worth checking out if you have not done so. Thank you, Shemyaku. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the knowledge you put into the world, and I cannot wait for us to have another session in which hopefully we'll have another person. So it might be a panel discussion about, is America moving forward or is America retrogressing? That's something for us to think about.
Stay tuned. Dr. Gideon, thank you so much for the light that you bring into the world, and it has been my honor to share space with you. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. And let's stay connected forever.
We will.
Peace
and blessings.
Blessings.